All right, if I could ask you to stand for the reading of God's Word. I'm going to read John chapter 19, verses 10 to 14. So Pilate said to him, "You will not speak to me. Do you not know that I have authority to release you and authority to crucify you?" Jesus answered him, "You would have no authority over me at all unless it had been given to you from above. Therefore, he who delivered me over to you has the greater sin." From then on, Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, "If you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar." So when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Stone Pavement, and in Aramaic, Gabbatha. Now it was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about the 6th hour. He said to the Jews, "Behold your king."
Amen. You guys can have a seat. Thanks, Dave. Happy 13 years. Man, oh man. You guys weren't sure. Should we clap for that or not? It was an emotional video. I'm Pastor Chris. If you're here for the first time, welcome. Thank you for joining us. If you're watching online, good to have you. We're going to continue what we've been in the last couple of weeks, a series called On the Way to the Cross. This is a series for the season of Lent, where we are tracking with Jesus' last 24 hours before his crucifixion, and every week we're examining a different person or group of people that he has encountered in those 24 hours. 2 weeks ago we talked about Judas, who betrayed him. Last week we talked about the Apostle Peter, and today we're going to continue to talk about some of the minor characters, which is Pontius Pilate. We're going to focus on him today. Pontius Pilate was the prefect, or the governor of Judea. He was appointed to rule over the region of Judea by Tiberius, the emperor, in AD 26. So he became the governor of Judea just shortly before Jesus launched his ministry. And he was the governor for about a decade, for about 10 years. It was a difficult post for Pilate. To rule in that region was especially difficult because in that region were the Hebrew people, the Jewish people, who were not excited to be ruled over by the Romans. They believed that their destiny was to be freed people, was to come out from underneath the thumb of Rome. So they would often push back, fight back. In fact, sometimes there were these so-called messiahs, people who claimed to be the deliverer for Israel, and they would lead a revolt against Rome. And it was Pilate's job to stomp out this revolt, to squash it, to bring it down. He sometimes was violent. He could be a very brutal, violent person, but sometimes he wasn't. He was actually quite pragmatic. Whatever it took to get the job done, and his job was to keep the peace. That was his job under Tiberius Caesar. Keep the peace, keep things in order. So if that meant be violent, he would be violent. If that meant back off and give the Jews a little space sometimes, he would do that. He was a politician. He was the epitome of a pragmatic politician, whatever it took to get the job done. That said, he was not a big fan of the Jewish people. He would often offend them on purpose, it seemed. We have accounts not only from our Gospels, but also other historians, Josephus and Phileo, who were contemporaries of his, who write about him. Pilate lived in Caesarea Maritime, which was not Jerusalem. So he didn't live in Jerusalem, but he is going to encounter Jesus on Passover week. And so we have to ask the question, well, what's he doing in Jerusalem at this point? Typically, Pilate would come down. He had a habit of coming down during Passover week, because Passover week was a time when all the Jews from the area throughout the empire would flood Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover, and it would be packed. It'd be like New York City, Times Square on New Year's Eve. So when you got a place that's packed with people, you need extra law enforcement. So Pilate would put in extra troops. So what he would do is he would travel down a coastal road south from Caesarea down to Joppa, and then he would head east to Jerusalem at the beginning of Passover week, which meant he would enter Jerusalem from the western gate. He would enter with his big white horse, with his army, with his soldiers, with trumpeters, announcing that he's here, making a big deal, because the message he wanted to send to them was, y'all better stay in line. Don't get any funny ideas, or the power and the might of Rome is going to come down on top of you. Now, around that time, we don't know if it was the same day. We don't know exactly when Pilate came in at the beginning of Passover. But on this particular year that we're talking about, possibly the same day, from the eastern gate of Jerusalem came riding in someone else to Jerusalem. A lowly carpenter, riding not on a big white horse, but on a donkey's colt. Riding not with an army, but with a ragtag group of disciples. Not with trumpeters, but with a crowd of people waving palm branches, shouting, Hosanna, Hosanna, or deliver us, deliver us. Because this man was someone that many believed to be the Messiah of Israel, their deliverer. So you had, at the beginning of Passover week, on this particular year, two empires entering Jerusalem. One with the power and the authority of the Roman Empire and flexing all that power, showing it off, and the other with the power and the authority of heaven, but cloaked in humility and meekness and gentleness. He was lowly, riding on a donkey's colt. Now, I just want to stop and ask the question, which one of those two empires do you guys think American Christians are most attracted to? Which pictures of a kingdom do you think American Christians are most drawn to? Do you think American Christians put their hope in, put their security in, pray for? Maybe a better way to put it. Which one are you most attracted to and drawn to? Tuck that question away. With that background, we're going to jump to John chapter 18. We're going to go all the way to chapter 19, verse 16. So 18:28 to 19:16. We're going to look at John's version of Pilate and Jesus interacting. John has the most extensive version of their back and forth, their encounter. He doesn't include every detail. Matthew has some details, and Luke has some details that he doesn't have. But John's is the most theological. It's the most extensive. So we're going to track with John primarily today. Now, by this point, Jesus has had his Passover meal with the disciples. He has washed their feet. He has predicted Judas's betrayal. He has predicted Peter's denial. They went off to the Garden of Gethsemane. He has prayed to the Father, if there's any other way, can we do it that way? Can I please not have to drink this cup? Nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. The temple guard came to arrest him. Jesus was taken away to the courtyard of the high priest, who we're going to look at next week. He was charged by the Jewish leaders with blasphemy, with saying he's going to destroy the temple. And they're like, that's it, that's enough for us. But they didn't want to just take him out back and stone him. They wanted him to be executed officially as an enemy of the state of Rome. So they're going to bring him to Pilate. And that is where we're going to pick it up. John 18, verse 28. We're just going to walk through a lot of stuff. We're going to reflect, and maybe I'll have some points at the end. I'm still not quite sure. And then we're going to receive communion together. Lord, help us see what you want us to see in this text, in this encounter. Help us to learn what you want us to learn. But most importantly, Jesus, most importantly, help us to see you. Help us to see you for who you are. In your name, amen. Then the Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas, that's the high priest, to the palace of the Roman governor. By now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanness, they did not enter the palace because they wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate came out to them and asked, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" As we look through this passage, you're going to see a lot of things that John points out as being ironic. John wants us to see the irony here. Here's the first thing. Jewish leaders bring Jesus to Pilate to accuse him of something that they know is not true, that he is a revolutionary trying to overthrow the Romans. They know this is not true, but they want to get rid of him. They bring him to Pilate, who is staying at the Praetorium, probably waking him up at this time of the late night, early morning hours. But they don't go inside, because if they go inside the home of a Gentile, they might get in contact with some object that is, they consider idolatrous, or they might touch some food that's unclean, and they don't want to be unclean for the Passover. The religious hypocrisy. Oh, we're going to hand this guy over and get him killed for reasons that we know aren't true, but we want to have our Passover meal. We don't want to be unclean. It's not about them today, but we'll probably look at them in a future week. Pilate is annoyed. What charges are you bringing against this man? He's like, why are you involving me? What does this have to do with me? They respond, if you were not a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you. This is a big deal, Pilate. We wouldn't be bothering you if this guy didn't do some serious stuff. Pilate said, take him yourselves and judge him by your own law. If this is a matter of your own religion, you guys deal with this. This isn't my business. But we have no right to execute anyone, they objected. So what they're implying here is, oh, Mr. Pilate, this man is a major threat to Rome. He needs to be executed. So they're saying this to get his attention. You need to deal with this, because Pilate, part of his job description was capital offenses. You're going to need to look at this one. Verse 32 says, this took place to fulfill what Jesus had said about the kind of death he was going to die. Jesus had previously said in the Gospel of John that I will be lifted up and I will draw all men to myself. And so this is to fulfill that. He is going to be lifted up on a Roman cross. Pilate then went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him. So this is Pilate and Jesus now. The Jewish leaders are still outside. Are you the king of the Jews? Now, Pilate's looking at a man who has been up all night, who has sweat drops of blood in the garden, who has been beaten on by the Jewish leaders at the courtyard of the high priest. His followers have abandoned him. So Pilate is looking at him, knowing he's not a threat, and going, are you the king of the Jews? Like, what is this all about? Is that your own idea, Jesus asked, or did others talk to you about me? In other words, can you speak for yourself? What do you think? Now, Pilate, being the governors tended to have a network of spies in their region, on the lookout for any potential threat, on the lookout for any potential revolt, reporting back to him about any rumblings. Pilate probably has heard about Jesus. He knows that he's an itinerant teacher, a Jewish rabbi, that there's claims of him doing miracles, but Pilate also knows he's not a threat. So Jesus is like, well, what do you think? What have you heard? What's your opinion of me? Am I a Jew? Pilate replied. Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it you have done? What did you do to tick them off to where they're handing you over to me? Who are you? Pilate is trying to figure this whole thing out. Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place." So Jesus is saying he has a kingdom, which implies he's a king, but it's a kingdom from another place. This does not mean that Jesus has a kingdom that is separate from this world and has nothing to do with this world. That's not what Jesus is saying. What he is saying is his power and his authority as a king do not come from the systems of the world where kings normally get their power and authority. Normally, kings of the world get their power and authority by blood. Your father was a king, and then you become the king when he dies, or by violence. You overthrow somebody else's throne and you take it. But Jesus is saying that's not the kind of kingdom that I have. If it were, my followers would have been fighting for me back in the garden. They would have prevented my arrest with the Jewish leaders. But remember, Jesus told them to stand down. So Jesus is telling him this is not the kind of kingdom that I'm about. But that doesn't mean his kingdom is not for this world. It is for this world. It's not from this world. The source of his power is not from this world, but it is a kingdom for this world. Right? Jesus told us to pray, "Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven." Jesus' kingdom is to invade planet Earth. But the power and the authority is not from the systems of this world. That's what he is saying. "You're a king then," said Pilate. Pilate is not really that interested in having a religious discussion here. He's just trying to make sense of this whole thing to determine, is this guy guilty or is he not? He's like, "Oh, so you're a king then." Jesus answered, "You say I'm a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." Everything I just said about my kingdom is truth. I am revealing truth to you, Pilate, because truth is something that only God reveals. Truth is not something that we in our wisdom and our talent figure out. It's not something you Google. This kind of truth is only revealed by God to humans. Jesus is doing just that to Pilate. He is revealing truth to Pilate. And he says, everyone on the side of truth, everyone who has been gifted this truth, will listen to me. That's a very exclusive claim right there. You might say, well, what if I don't listen to Jesus? Then you're not on the side of truth. That's what Jesus is saying. Jesus is trying to show Pilate who he is. "What is truth?" retorted Pilate. Pilate doesn't really care. Pilate's not interested in a religious discussion or a philosophical discussion about truth. Pilate lives, at least in his mind, he lives in the real world, where truth is about whose army is stronger, who's more politically savvy. That's the world that Pilate lives in, and that's the only thing he is concerned about right now. He is standing right in front of truth embodied in a human. He doesn't care. He's not that interested. He's in the middle of a political squabble, and he's trying to figure out how to do his job and keep the peace. That's it. He's pragmatic. He's not interested in truth. With this, he went out again to the Jews gathered there and said, "I find no basis for a charge against him." He's like, guys, this guy is not a threat to Rome. I'm not going to crucify somebody who's not a threat to Rome. Now, at this point in the timeline, John does not include this, but Luke does. We don't have time to go there. I was going to go there. We don't have time. Luke's gospel shows us that Pilate finds out that Jesus is from Galilee. So Pilate is like, oh, he's from Galilee? Then send him to King Herod. So Jesus is sent to King Herod to deal with him because Pilate doesn't want to be involved. He doesn't want to be bothered. He doesn't want to be blamed. Get him out of here. That's Pilate's, this is his, way out. Get him over to King Herod. Jesus goes to King Herod. You can read about this in Luke's gospel. King Herod sees him, and King Herod doesn't really find anything majorly wrong with him. So Herod sends him back to Pilate. So Pilate's like, oh gosh, he's back on my table here. So keep going with John. Verse 39. So Pilate has another idea to get out of this. It's your custom for me to release to you one prisoner at the time of the Passover. Do you want me to release the king of the Jews? So Pilate rules over this land of Judea. The Jews, sometimes they need to have some violence, coming down on top of them to keep the peace. But because he's a good politician, it was his custom at the time of the Passover, when there's Jews flooding the area, he wants to keep the peace. So most likely, he has this habit of releasing a prisoner just to kind of throw them a bone, just to kind of placate them a little bit. So he has this idea, oh, wait a second, this is the time I can release a prisoner to you. I've got all these violent ones in prison, or I got this guy who we all know is not that violent and he's not really a threat. And so Pilate probably thinks that Jesus, compared to the others, is going to make the Jewish leaders go, all right, don't release the violent ones. They're going to cause some trouble, and then Rome's going to come down on us and get violent. We don't want that. Release this guy, Jesus. All right, release him. That's probably what Pilate is thinking at this point. This is his way out. Get Jesus released. They shouted back, no, not him. Give us Barabbas. Now, Barabbas had taken part in an uprising. Another piece of irony that Jesus is pointing, or that John is pointing out here. Jesus is being accused of trying to lead an uprising. They know it's not true, but they say, give us the guy who we know did lead an uprising. Now, even more ironic, Barabbas could have been a guy who claimed to be the Messiah and therefore led a revolt against Rome, or he could have been somebody who supported somebody else who claimed to be the Messiah and led the revolt against Rome. Either way, he's guilty of the very thing they're accusing Jesus of. And they know he's guilty, and they know Jesus is innocent. But the Jewish leaders are so threatened by Jesus that they're like, give us the guy who we know is violent. Give us the guy who we know if he gets out and he might do the same thing again and then cause trouble for us. In fact, Matthew and Mark say Pilate knew that it was out of self-interest that the Jewish leaders handed Jesus over. Pilate could see right through this. They were playing politics, and Pilate, being a politician, could see right through it. Let's keep going. Blank screen because I had something else to show. I'll just quickly summarize. At this point, while Pilate is trying to get them to choose Barabbas, or choose Jesus to be released instead of Barabbas, Pilate's wife, Matthew's gospel has this, Pilate's wife comes to him and says, I had a dream about this Jesus. Don't have a hand in handing him over to be crucified. Don't do it. This man is innocent. And Pilate, because of the political pressure, he doesn't listen to her. But Matthew wants us to see that this woman, a Gentile woman, is being given a dream of some kind, presumably by God, right? This is before the Holy Spirit is poured out on the church. A Gentile woman has a dream by God where she goes to her husband and says, don't do it. The right thing is to not kill this man. Don't harm him. But Pilate is under such political pressure that he cannot listen to her. Let's keep tracking with John. Now we're in chapter 19, verse 1. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. This would be extremely brutal. Cat o' nine tails, a sheep bone at the end of a whip, whipping somebody's skin again and again and again, flesh being torn off. Oftentimes, victims of flogging would die just from that. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him again and again, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they slapped him in the face. Again, John is pointing out irony here. They are mocking the one who actually is the king, making fun of him, pretending to worship him, the one who is worthy of worship. Once more, Pilate came out and said to the Jews gathered there, "Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him." When Jesus came out, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." Now, I think Pilate is trying once more, this is a third strategy, to get out of this pickle here and have Jesus be released and not crucify him. He flogged him, basically tortured him, but now brings him out and is basically like, "Look, isn't this enough? I don't even think he's guilty of anything, but look, I beat him up pretty bad. Can we call it a day? Can I release him now? We don't need to do any more." So he says, "Behold the man." I think he's trying to elicit sympathy from the crowd. Look at this man, bloodied and beaten to a pulp. "Behold the man," Pilate says. He's not a threat. But John wants us to see something deeper. Pilate is prophesying something that he doesn't even know he's prophesying when he says, "Behold the man." John wants us to behold the man. This is a Friday morning, the 6th day of the week. The 6th day of the week of creation in the Genesis account is the day that God put humanity in the garden, Adam and Eve. Humans made in the image of God to care for creation. They fractured it, they sinned, they broke it. And now, so many years later, on another 6th day of the week, God in the flesh, the ultimate man, right? The ultimate reflection of God, stands there after being beaten and flogged. I love this quote from N.T. Wright, a New Testament scholar. He says this, we'll go back to that. "The words hang over the whole of chapter 19 as Jesus goes to the cross. This, John is telling us, is the true reflection of God. This is what it means that Jesus, the eternal Word, took our flesh. Look at this man, and you'll see your living, loving, bruised, and bleeding God. Behold the man." It's a little screenshot from the Passion of the Christ. Behold the man. John wants us to behold the man who stands there. Let's keep going. Verse 6, "As soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, 'Crucify, crucify.'" No sympathy. Now, maybe the crowd had sympathy for Jesus standing there all bloodied and bruised and beaten. But they say, "Crucify, crucify." But Pilate answered, "You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him." Now, Pilate wasn't giving them legal permission to crucify him. It was just kind of him saying that facetiously. He was exasperated with them. He's like, "You crucify him. This guy's not guilty, and I know it, and you know it, and this is a whole big political game that you're playing here." The Jews answered him, "We have a law, and according to that law, he ought to die because he has made himself the Son of God." When Pilate heard this statement, he was even more afraid. Now, Son of God, in the Jewish folks' mind, that was blasphemy. Pilate didn't care about their Jewish blasphemy laws. However, in the Roman Empire, you could have many, many gods. It didn't really matter. You can have all kinds of gods. But Caesar was the son of a god. So if Jesus is claiming to be the Son of God, that could be interpreted as a threat against Caesar. So Pilate's like, okay, is there something real here? So he's going to pull Jesus back inside. Right? If you notice this, outside, inside, outside. He's going back inside now. He entered his headquarters again and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. So Pilate said to him, "You will not speak to me? Do you not know that I have authority to release you and authority to crucify you?" Pilate's like, you got to say something. You got to give me something here. I got to know what to do with you. Help me understand. If you're innocent, help me understand. Give me some evidence. If you're guilty, I need to know that too. Don't you know who I am? Don't you know that your life is in my hands, Pilate is saying? Look how Jesus responds. Jesus answered him, you would have no authority over me at all unless it had been given to you from above. In other words, Jesus says, no. Your life, Pilate, is in my hands. Your power comes from God the Father. My life is not in your hands. Jesus has previously said, no one takes my life from me. I lay it down, and I'm going to pick it up again. Pilate doesn't have the authority here. Pilate doesn't have the power here. He thinks he does. And Jesus is saying, no. Whatever power you have is because God allowed it. Think of the implications of this for us. Think of the weight that we might tend to give kings, presidents. Right? This is a very big political statement that Jesus is making to Pilate. I am not in your hands, Pilate. You are in my hands. Think of the things that people have said over the decades about our president. Oh no, they're taking God out of our country. Oh no. And then, a president comes along and says, I'm bringing God back to our country. Oh, yay, that's wonderful. Think of the silliness for Christians to think that that's a legitimate claim. God puts them there and then takes them down. And then God puts them there and then he takes them down because they are in his hands. Nobody allows God into a country. No president or king or ruler allows God. Think about Iran. Think about the government that they've had. Christianity has still been spreading. I've been getting newsletters about Iran for years. Christianity is spreading in Iran because God's at work everywhere. If only we have eyes to see it, but we give too much weight to people who have political power. Just like in that day. And Jesus is like, no, Pilate. You're small, my friend. You're small. And may we have eyes to see other human beings, no matter what position they're in, as small. Then Jesus says, therefore he who delivered me over to you has the greater sin. So for Pilate, not only does he not have the power to take Jesus' life, but he also is not going to be held ultimately responsible. Pilate is not guilty of the greater sin. Who's guilty of the greater sin? Jesus is probably referring to either the high priest or the body of priests who handed Jesus over, who knew what they were doing, wanted to take Jesus out. That's who is guilty of the greater sin. That's who Jesus has been concerned about all along. If you follow the gospel accounts, Jesus was most concerned not with Rome, not with the secular government. Jesus knew what to do with them. He knew what category they were in. He was most concerned with his own people, who had the law, who had the prophets, who should have seen the Messiah standing in front of them. But when they did, they wanted to take him out. That's who Jesus has been most concerned with all along. And I would venture to say the same still holds in our day. Jesus is not as concerned or offended by culture out there doing the crazy things that culture is doing, and they're doing some crazy things. He's more concerned with us, singing songs about Jesus, and then compromising, misrepresenting him out there in culture. That's who he's most concerned with. Let's keep going. Verse 12, from then on, Pilate sought to release him. But the Jews cried out, if you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar. Now, here's another piece of irony. They're acting like they're on Caesar's side now. And this is a threat. They're threatening Pilate. They're basically saying, if you let this man go, we're gonna complain to Caesar. We're going to tell him that you let go a man who's a threat to the Roman Empire. And it was not uncommon for the subjects of a governor to go above their head and go to the Caesar and say, hey, this guy is being too violent, or this guy is doing this or doing that. And then the emperor would say to the governors, you have this time frame to kill yourself before I have your soldiers take you out. Now, it might not have always been that extreme, but that's what kind of power the emperors had over the governors. So it is very possible that Pilate's like, he understands what they're doing. They're threatening to go to Caesar, and if they complain, and Pilate has had some complaints already in the past because of some things he did with the Jews. So it's possible that Pilate's on thin ice with the Caesar. And if he hears one more complaint, he's like, Pilate, let's take a walk. Let's take a walk off a short pier, kind of thing. So when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Stone Pavement, in an Aramaic, Gabbatha. Now it was a day of Now it was a day of preparation of the Passover. This is when the lambs were being prepared to be slain. It was about the 6th hour. He said to the Jews, "Behold your king." Lambs are being prepared to be slain. Here comes the Lamb of God. Pilate takes him, says to the crowd, "Behold your king." Pilate knows that they don't see him as their king, but he's mocking them now. I think he's just had it with them. He knows where this is going. He knows he's going to have to give in, but he's angry, and he's like, here's your king. Here's your king. Here's the guy that you want crucified. Here he is. But again, John, writing later, is pointing out that Pilate is speaking prophetically to all of us, to all of his readers. Behold your king. This is your king. The one who is willing to go through all this for you. The one who held everybody else in the palm of his hands and yet allowed himself to be bound and suffer. Behold your king. Verse 15, they cried out, They cried out, away with him, crucify him. Pilate said to them, shall I crucify your king? The chief priests answered, we have no king but Caesar. So he delivered him over to them to be crucified. Now, one more piece of irony here. When they say we have no king but Caesar, historically, this would have been considered by Jewish leaders as idolatrous. To say that a Gentile ruler is their king, there's no king but God, Yahweh, and the Messiah who will come through the line of David. To say that a Gentile ruler is their king, that's idolatry. And yet, here are the Jewish leaders saying that because they're filled with such hate for Jesus that now they're playing this game with Pilate. Oh, Caesar's our king, and we're all for Caesar. So Pilate delivered him over to be crucified. I'm going to call the band up. We're going to stop there. We're going to just reflect on a few things here before we receive communion together. We're going to have some stations to my right, to my left, in the back, and we're going to receive it all together in a moment. But before we come take it, before we grab the elements, let's just consider some of the things that John wanted us to see in this passage. Just a few of them. First off, Pilate thought that Jesus was a pawn in a political chess game. But really, it was Pilate who was a pawn in God's redemption story. This grand story of redemption, Pilate had a part to play. He was a little pawn, and he didn't know it. And so are all the powerful people we are tempted to both fear and to idolize. They're pawns. They don't let God in or keep God out. They don't give God permission. God is God, revealed in Jesus. Jesus is God. Another thing, Jesus appears bound, but he's the one in charge. He's the one confident. He's the one stable through this whole thing. Pilate appears in charge, but he's fearful. He's fearful, back and forth. He's vacillating. He knows what the right thing to do is. But he can't just do it. He can't just do the right thing. He has to try all these political games. Let me send him to Herod. Oh, that backfired. Oh, let me try to release him instead of Barabbas. Oh, that backfired. Let me just beat him up a little bit and then get him to be released. Oh, that backfired too. Remember the whole story. He didn't want to be bothered. He didn't want to be involved. He didn't want to be blamed. His wife warned him about it. His conscience warned him about it. But he ignored all of it because of self-preservation. He just wanted to cling to his position, to his power, to his authority, to his life. He didn't want to get in trouble with the emperor. History tells us that Pilate could be a bully. But like many bullies, here we see Pilate as a coward. He knows what the right thing is, but he doesn't do it. Pilate was sympathetic to Jesus. He didn't hate Jesus, but he still completely missed him. It is very possible to say, yeah, Jesus was a good guy. Jesus was innocent. Jesus shouldn't have been crucified. That's such a tragedy. And still miss who he is. He's standing right in front of him, truth. And Pilate's like, what is truth? I got to figure this whole thing out. Pilate missed him. Will you see him? As I was watching the slideshow earlier, looking at photos from 13 years, people who have come into our church, or moved away, or left. And I was just thinking, like, we're going to have our meeting afterwards in the cafeteria, and we'll talk about some things we're doing. But at the end of the day, the most important thing for us, everything we do, is so that we could behold our King. We could see him for who he is. And as I was watching the slideshow, I was like, has everybody whose face flashed across that scene, have they beheld our King? Have they seen him? The one who's the true King, the embodiment of truth, the sovereign ruler of everything, and who willingly went to the cross for you, for me. Can we see him? The bread represents his body, and the cup his blood. And Jesus said to do this in remembrance of me. And when we do this, we're remembering this is who he is. The King of the universe stepped off his throne and came here. He embodied the true reflection of God for you and I. And while he was the sovereign ruler of everything, he submitted himself to all these petty, pathetic human beings who passed him around, tortured him, mocked him. All the while, he could have snapped his fingers and ended it all for each one of them. And then he willingly went to the cross, not as a victim, but as the Lamb of God, slain since the foundations of the world, so that he could purchase you and me, people who are redeemed and washed, people who have screwed up mightily and yet can be declared righteous, and people who could walk through this world just as confident as Jesus was before Pilate. Not fearful like Pilate, but confident like Jesus. Because we know who our King is. We know who we belong to. We know where we're going. When we can behold our King, we can have that kind of confidence. When we don't see him for who he is, then we're pathetic and cowardly like Pilate. And my prayer is that we would be a church that can behold our King and be confident like he was in this world. So may we remember that as we receive communion. I'm going to ask if we could stand. You guys can come down to the tables or go back to the tables in the back and grab the elements. We're going to receive it all together after everyone has it. So just hold on to it. The band is going to lead us, and I'll be back up in a moment.